This is Ryan Finkelstein, host of Locked On Mets, and on today's show, I was joined by Jack Ramsey to talk about the Mets outfield situation with Brandon Nimmo going down with this latest injury. Is Kevin Pillar a good enough answer for the Mets to make a run in the NL East? Should they promote Khalil Lee? Give the rookie a chance to give this team a little jolt. We also talk about the future of the outfield for the Mets with Nimmo's constant injury concerns, with Michael Conforto potentially leaving in free agency. Who are some prospects that could come up next year and make an impact in the Mets outfield?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by Spotify Green Room. Download the app and join me tonight during the Mets game to get in on the action. Spotify Green Room, changing the way we talk sports. So today I am joined by Jack Ramsey. Looking forward to getting a fresh perspective on this Mets season. I actually haven't spoken with Jack much since I left Mets Mirage. So first off, before we get into anything else, what have you been up to? Where can people find your work?
How's it going, man? Happy to be here. Thanks for having me back on. As of right now, focusing on school, doing my best with that. But I joined on the Amazing City podcast with Antonio Slater. You can find my work there. Everything's still down at my Twitter handle over here. Everything's still down on my handle. You can follow and find my opinions and my thoughts there. Still looking for a new writing home. You know, something that can kind of fit the balance of school and baseball. But until then, find me weekly on the Amazing City Pod with Antonio and through my Twitter.
And so for the podcast audience, Jack's Twitter is Jack W. Ramsey, and it's incredible the sources that someone your age has curated. So it's really impressive. You should definitely follow him. You'll get some good tidbits about the Mets for sure. So let's talk a little bit about center field. I know that you had a post recently, Free Khalil Lee. I want to talk about Khalil Lee a little bit because I can't see Kevin Pillar putting together 4 good weeks for this Mets team. So let's start there, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Khalil Lee and Brandon Nimmo in particular. So what do you think when it comes to Kevin Pillar? He's had a good week, but we've seen all season. Do you think they can really run him out there every day in center field and get by with him?
I really don't think they can. I think he's at the point right now where you kind of have to ride the hot hand. That's kind of where the season's at right now too. You can't play too much into, the numbers and the analytics and all that. Obviously you do because they've gotten you to this point, but you're also at a spot where if someone's just tearing the cover off the ball and is putting together good at bat after good at bat after good at bat, you have 24 games left and you're 4 games out. You can't afford to be playing the numbers too much. You kind of have to ride the hot hands as long as they're going to take you. And, I think we all know at this point in his career, especially what he's shown this season, Kevin Pillar is not a guy who's going to put up 4 strong weeks in a row. You effectively need 3.5 weeks of really, really good baseball to get you to where you need to be. I think Kuma made the point this morning that they feasibly are going to have to go 18-6 down the stretch to try and to make the playoffs. Because, in the NL East, you still have 2 teams ahead of you. And in the wild card, I believe it's 3 still.
Yeah,
Phillies,
I think so.
Padres, and Reds. Yeah, 3 teams ahead of you. So, you need 3.5 weeks of exceptional baseball. So obviously, I think you ride Pillar until you can't ride him anymore. But you can't give him that long leash. He's a veteran. He'll figure it out because the second he starts not winning you baseball games, that could be costing you playoff spot. So I think for Pillar, you need to ride him as long as you can. I think Lee's a different conversation. Because I think my main gripe is that they have Albert Almora on the roster over Lee, which to me feels like a joke. I understand that, Almora is a natural center fielder while there's still some definite question marks with Lee's defensive ability. But he's young enough that he can make up for it with his speed and his athleticism. He doesn't take great routes to baseballs, and I think that's kind of putting it lightly and kindly. But he has shown, whether it's in video that we see coming out of Syracuse or with his brief stint with the Mets earlier in the year, that he can make up for it with great closing speed. He's an electric player. He's really starting to come into his own offensively. He has an absurdly high walk rate. He's really been showing some power lately. So I think we're at a point now with the Mets where you only get 2 extra roster spots this year. So you really have to kind of make the most of them. And, if you're really only giving Almora 1 or 2 at-bats a week, and maybe he's getting in games as a late defensive replacement, I'm not really sure it's a worthwhile roster spot, because effectively Khalil Lee can do the same thing, but also provide a decent lefty bat off the bench. If you're in a spot where you need if you're Rojas and you want a power lefty bat at the plate, you don't really have that coming off your bench right now, assuming all your starters are in there. It leaves you Guillorme, Mazika. That's about it as your lefty bats coming off the bench. Again, assuming all your starters are in there. Obviously JD's been on the bench a lot more lately, and if Dom continues to struggle, they might get the JD Dom platoon going, and they're obviously still riding the hot hand with every position. But I just think it's a waste of a roster spot to have Almora up on your team, especially when Khalil Lee can effectively do everything Almora does. Granted, slightly worse defense, but he's also providing more as a viable bat off the bench. It really doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, I think that right now, the way I kind of see it is I'm okay with Khalil Lee down as long as you're going to be playing Pilar every day. But as soon as Pilar shows that regression, which is coming fast, I guarantee you, give it a couple of days, Kevin Pilar is going to look like the Kevin Pilar we've seen all season. I mean, let's not forget, there was a 2-month span where he didn't draw a walk. Khalil Lee is at least going to give you, obviously at the major league level, not the same degree of on-base prowess as you're losing in Nemo, but I mean, he's certainly getting on base at that type of a clip in Syracuse. So I think he can give you some of that. And I would get him regular playing time in Syracuse. And then when it's time to pull the ripcord on Pilar, I would not only call him up, but give Lee a healthy amount of playing time, more than you would give a player like Almora, because I think there's some upside there. This episode is brought to you by Spotify Green Room. Green Room is the first social audio platform made for sports fans. The app is free to download, and once you're in, you can talk with me, other fans, and athletes in real time about your favorite team or sport. I'll be hosting a Spotify Green Room tonight during the Mets game, where you can finally join in on the conversation you listen to here every day. Go download the free Green Room app now, currently available on all devices. Be sure to create your profile, link your Twitter, join the MLB group for the latest league updates, and follow me at Finkelstein Ryan to be notified when my room goes live. I know you don't want to miss it. Again, I'll be live tonight during the Mets game. I'll see you there. Spotify Green Room, changing the way we talk sports. Do you know that 85% of people who play daily fantasy sports lose? Is it really that surprising? The game is rigged against you. You're playing against thousands of other lineups, not to mention the experts who have more tools and more time. You just don't stand a chance. Well, introducing StatHero. It's the first ever daily fantasy sportsbook that puts the player in control and winning within reach. Here's how it works. StatHero shows you their lineups and dares you to beat them. It's you versus the house in a head-to-head fantasy matchup. You name your stakes, winner take all. You have the advantage. StatHero is showing you their lineups ahead of time. No one else does that. Play StatHero now and change the odds by going to stathero.com/lockedon. Sign up for free, and right now you can get 3 times back on your first play. That's right, they're giving you a 300% match. That's unheard of. Go to stathero.com/lockedon, stathero.com/lockedon. And when I look at all of these options, Pilar, Almora, or Lee, I just think Lee has the most upside to provide a spark down the stretch and maybe really help this team make that push towards winning the division.
Yeah, I think you make a good point with his that obviously his walk rate will drop off a little bit. You can't expect to tail off too much. But with losing Nemo, you're losing a very high OBP guy. And Khalil Lee has shown that he can walk and get on base at a very high. Obviously it won't be the same. But with how your upper level depth and how your major league roster is currently set up, Khalil Lee will be the closest replacement you have to what you're losing in Brandon Nimmo.
Yeah.
Considering mainly considering how well he's been getting on base this year. You can't really base his value off that. I think it was like a 15-game stretch in May when he some would argue he wasn't even ready for AAA. I'll be the first one to argue that. He was struggling in AAA. Not struggling, but he wasn't playing nearly as well as he is right now in AAA earlier in the year. His OBP for this year in the minor leagues is 443. That's insane.
Yeah, I know it
And the
is.
main knock on him is that he's a high strikeout guy, and that might still be true. But a 443 OBP is incredibly impressive. And that's the closest thing that you have right now to what you're losing in Nimmo. I think we'd all agree Nimmo's most valuable asset to the Mets is his ability to get on base at the top of the order. Whether it's to a walk, a base hit, whatever, he gets on base. And granted, VR's been playing great lately, and I know you love your guy. But the VR's not going to be hitting 500 every 10 games anymore.
What do you
That
mean?
regression will be there too. I
Of
know it
course he
might be the
will.
harsh truth. But when that happens, what do you do? Like, who do you plug in at the leadoff spot? So I'm not gonna sit here and advocate. All right, let's throw Khalil Lee straight into the fire. But I think you have to take a honest look at what you're losing through losing Brandon Nimmo,
Yeah.
and who is the closest replication to that. And it's not Pilar, it's not Amora. I don't think the long-term answer is, at least for the rest of the year, is stick Jeff McNeil in left field and figure out the infield later, or figure out the second base and third base later. Because obviously Baez has been great, but even McNeil has shown he can struggle at third base a little bit. VR definitely has his moments defensively at third base. When the offensive regression comes, your next man up is JD Davis at third base. And I think we all know that that's not pretty.
No.
we've all been prisoner to that moment and that experience for the last 3 years. So there's a lot of question marks as to if you're going to make this run that the Mets want to go on, and have kind of started to go on. What are you going to do when the veterans who are overperforming start to hit that regression? And
Yeah.
a lot of that circles back to center field, and like, all right, what are you going to do in center field? Because currently your only two options are Pilar and Almora. So when they start to struggle, what do you do?
Yeah, I think that's why Khalil Lee is really attractive right now to come up and just see if you can get that spark. We have seen it in the past that sometimes a rookie can provide that for a team down the stretch, and that can really be something that takes you over the top. I want to talk a little bit about Brandon Nimmo real quick, because I think what we've seen from Nemo is when he's on the field, he's going to be a great contributor. He's going to get on base. The defense continues to get better year over year. He's learning how to play center field a little bit better. Even though I don't think he's a great center fielder, I think you can get by with him in center. But the availability, I don't want to ever label someone injury prone, especially when it's not the same injury that's recurring. We've seen a neck, we've seen a hamstring, we've seen hand and wrist issues. But when they continue to happen year over year, can we ever expect Brandon Nimmo is going to play 140 games a season? And how do you plan for that when you go into next year?
I mean, I think at this point, I don't know if that's a totally fair conversation because, as you said, it's been a plethora of different injuries. It's kind of like the DeGrom thing from this year. DeGrom had 6 different MRIs on 6 different issues, or whatever the number was. So it's a big question mark, obviously, especially as he's going into a contract year. Because him and his camp are gonna want, value based on his production as a player, and the Mets are gonna look at his value based on what he gives them over a 162. So obviously, if he's missing 50, 60 games a year, it's a much different conversation. And Khalil Lee is kind of the best. He's the best outfield prospect the Mets have, and after him, it's kind of a steep drop. The Brett Beatty in left field experiment was quickly shot down, mainly because he's a great third baseman. He's turning himself into a very, very solid defensive third baseman, but also because the instincts weren't great. They tried the Mark Vientos in left field experience, and I was told that was horrible. So I think there's a lot of weird different angles to approach the Nemo conversation from. But I think the biggest question, like as you said, is he might never give you the 145 games in center field. I think it's what makes a Michael Conforto that much more valuable. Conforto's only really had one major injury in his career, and even then, it was a freak one at the back end of the lost season, and a year he was an all-star. So I just think with their outfield in general, the Mets are going to have a lot of questions. because in theory they don't really have a left fielder right now. You don't, you have an injury prone center fielder who's going into his walk year next year, and you have a right fielder having a down year who is in the back end of his walk year now. They have no starting outfielder under contract after 2022. So I think from that sense, you almost have to, at least for the short term, lock Nemo up. Maybe you can agree to a 2 or 3 year deal, buy out his final year of arbitration, his maybe a first year or two of free agency, so you can take a longer look at him, at his value, at where the organization presents itself to. Because prospects do not that they randomly develop out of nowhere, but the Mets have done a fine job at developing position players from mid-tier prospects into regular everyday major leaguers.
Yeah.
No one was really screaming from the mountaintops about Jeff McNeil. There were major questions about Pete Alonso, and he was labeled as a DH before he even reached AAA. So obviously there's going to be questions about a player who has a bunch of random injuries through the year. I think the Mets need to try and buy themselves a couple more years with him, at least in the short term, to take a deeper look at, all right, here's where we are. Where do we go from here?
Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. Did you know that there's so many delicious flavors to choose from that there really is something for everyone? Whether it's the coconut bar, cherry barcia, raspberry, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry, orange, or my personal favorite, cookies and cream. If you haven't tried all the flavors, you can get a mixed box and try them all and see which ones you like best. These are protein bars that taste like candy bars. They come covered in 100% chocolate. They're soft, they're easy to chew, and they're healthy. Built Bars come low in calories, low in sugar, but they're high in protein and high in fiber. If you want to try Built Bar today, go to BuiltBar.com, use the promo code LOCK15, and you'll get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another lets you stream your favorite shows, you're watching your sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for all the other good stuff that you're missing. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment you love without the hassle and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before. So you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directv.com. That's directv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Yeah, I think the Mets have three interesting cases of prospects that I think could contribute more than you would expect next year. And one of them we've been talking about in Khalil Lee, who's the highest upside one and maybe in the highest floor one. The two others that are just intriguing to me right now, it's Jake Mangum, who is a guy that never really seemed like he was going to be a legitimate prospect. The ceiling was always fourth outfielder, but he continues to produce offensively. So at a certain point, when you talk about these mid-tier prospects that can break out, maybe Mangum can contribute. I don't know if he's ever going to be a starter, but could he be a key cog in the 22 Mets? I think possibly. And the other one is the guy they got midseason, Carlos Rincon, who brings a lot of power. Maybe that can help you out in left field. What do you think about those two guys and their ability to contribute next season?
I'm actually a big fan of Rincon. I think he's a solid bat. I don't know much about his defensive profile, but I definitely think the bat is there. Just because of where he's at in terms of minor league service time, he needs to be protected from the 40-man roster this winter. So the Mets will have to make a decision there because he'll be Rule 5 eligible, and with a bat like that, I guarantee you he'll be gone. If not in the major league side of things and in the minor league side of things, he'll be gone. I'll be the first to admit I'm not a huge fan of Mangum's profile, which is interesting because his profile completely flipped this year. He went from a high contact, low strikeout, low power guy to a low contact, high strikeout, high power. Home runs his power is at an all time high, but so are the strikeouts and the contact's at an all time low. So it's really an interesting case on profiling prospects. When I talked to Mark Tremuta for Metsmerized, he said that he thinks his biggest flaw is that he always undervalues a player's power. That he never guesses. He's usually a little low on power when he looks at prospects. So no one was really too high on Mangum's power, but then suddenly it comes out of nowhere this year. So it's really an interesting case. Defensively the profile's there. The speed is there. So I think, at the minimum, at his absolute worst, he does offer you kind of what Albert Almora is right now, just being a quad A fifth outfielder type, which, those are valuable within reason. Because if you have those, it keeps you away from having to play the Cameron Maidens of the world, give them key at bats and key innings. So I definitely think he brings value to the Mets either next year or the year after. But I'm definitely not sold on the bat. I think it's far more likely we see a world in which the Mets, run Dom or JD or McNeil back out there in left field next year. We see Rincon start in Syracuse, and if he hits the ball enough, he's up in left field by mid-June or July. It was definitely surprising that the Mets were able to get a functioning body for a DFA'd Billy McKinney. But Rincon, the power's there, the bat's there. Nothing has really shown that it's a fluke. But it's starting to stabilize. Because when you get those super young prospects, those super young Hispanic prospects, it's a lot of eye tests and a lot of just eyeball scouting from your international scouts. Because if you go look at the college scene or the high school scene, you have stats, you have numbers, you have velos, you have TrackMan, you have Repsodo, whatever it might be. You have all that data and analytics, whereas it's a lot harder to get that coming out of the DR, coming out of South American countries, coming out of the Caribbean. So it's definitely a lot more of I don't want to say a guessing game, but it's a lot more of an old school approach to scouting. So there's a belief that Rincon, had the upside, but the strikeouts and the defensive profile. So now you see it all starting to stabilize and becoming a legit prospect. I was talking to Mike Mayer from Mets Rise about it. He sees Rincon as a top 20 guy in the Mets system right now with a chance to legitimately contribute to the team. Those are the type of guys you need to be able to bring in. I think, for all his recent faults, one of Zach Scott's better attributes was that he didn't just give guys away, and he didn't just walk away from the table empty-handed. He weaved his way into the Benintendi deal, was able to pick up Khalil Lee. He got some great value. Actually, I don't remember if that was him or Porter or Sandy. The Mets got great value on the Steven Matz deal.
Yeah.
For the solid year he's having, Reed Foley's been great for them. They, the righty they got that they then moved to Boston in the Lee trade, he's been solid, and Lee's been solid in AAA. Yency Diaz has shown flashes of being like a legit major league reliever. So they've done a really good job of getting the most value they can for players. I think Rincon's just another example of that, and he might have, for as good as Reed Foley and Diaz have been, I think Rincon might have the most upside and might have the bigger impact of anyone in the Mets to pick up this winter, not named Khalil Lee. Now, obviously, I think Khalil Lee might end up being, a starting major league outfielder, depending on where you put him. But I think if the bat works out for Rincon and he can, just play a mediocre left field, I think it might be a legit piece for the Mets. Next year will be a big year for him. A full year in the system, most likely pushing AAA. He's had a great year in AA. He was in AA for the Dodgers too. I don't see him in AA again next year. But even this winter will be big for him. They'll either have to protect him from the 40-man, maybe try and trade him, or just risk letting him go elsewhere. But I think that's legit.
Yeah, I think that this is a pretty. It's a good example of what Zach Scott was able to do this year. As much as we can talk about the downside, people will critique the deadline, and of course, the latest DUI incident, not not his best moment, and certainly one that might lead to him leaving the Mets. But you turn Steven Matz and Billy McKinney into Carlos Rincon and Khalil Lee, as you said. That's pretty good value right there. And I think looking at the Mets outfield in the future, while on paper right now we say that it's pretty barren and there might not be a clear answer once Nemo and Conforto are no longer under contract. You have to figure out what to do with them. There is some hope with some of these guys, not necessarily your Pete Crow Armstrong types, but guys that can maybe surprise you and really help this team. One more time, it is Jack W. Ramsey on Twitter. And once again, tell people what that podcast is, where they can find it.
It's the Amazing City Podcast, Antonio Slater and myself. The relatively new one for season. I jumped on a little bit before the deadline. I'm pretty sure this week, aside from talking about current Mets, we're gonna talk a little football. He's a Giants fan. I'm a Broncos fan. Got that week 1 matchup, so we'd be stupid not to talk about it a little bit. We might even, if we have a little bit of free time at the end, if we're a little under our time limit, we might try and figure out which Met would make the best quarterback. Go from there. See if we can build a football team around the Mets.
What are your
Or we
early?
can
I'm thinking that Conforto just make him a scrambler and just have Conforto go out, and he's got the football background. That's all I could think of.
Oh, true. I was thinking, just based on my love of the Broncos and their super tall quarterback pocket passers, Taiwan might make a good quarterback.
Ooh, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Give him some good tackles, little pocket presence. He's a big dude. He can see the whole field.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that's a good pick.
Put Khalil Lee in the slot. Get him some slants in open field. Let him take off.
There you go. All right. Well, that was this week's episode of Locked On Mets, and maybe we'll get Jack on at some point with our guy Jordan Grossman and talk more prospects this offseason.